Hi, this is Danny Doyle, and welcome to something a little bit different. This is my first attempt at an LTC. Although this particular format is a far cry from a standard LTC, this is a free-play LTC of Fire Emblem 8: The Sacred Stones. Now, what is a free-play LTC? As far as I am aware, the first instance of the free-play format being mentioned, talked about, or played is Juan776, who I will link the YouTube channel of in the description. My particular rule set might be slightly different than the one they used, but here is how I am defining my free-play LTC. I can replace any blue unit with any other possible blue unit in the game, including post-game characters like the creature campaign characters. However, I can only have one copy of each unit, so I can't just stack myself with 8 Lyons or something. In addition, I can replace any and all items in blue units starting inventories. I can't change the number of items, and each unit has the number of items of the unit they are replacing. So for example, the unit replacing Seth will have 3 items, one representing the Silver Spear, one representing the Steel Sword, and one representing the Vulnerary. I am additionally allowing myself to replace any items that you get from events, such as saving the villagers in Chapter 6, or visiting any houses or villages that give items. However, I cannot change an event that does not give you an item into giving you an item. For example, if a house gives you gold, I can't suddenly make it give you an item. I'm also disallowing myself from editing enemies, including editing any droppable items. The reason for this is that theoretically, if a boss had a droppable item, I could edit the enemy in order to give them an item they can't use and make an easy boss kill, and I don't find that to be a particularly interesting thing to do. Now obviously, the fact that I can have tons of items and units that you wouldn't have access to early in the game is going to make this play very differently than a standard playthrough of Sacred Stones would. But there is one other change that I want to draw attention to as well, and that is the fact that I've given every unit 100% growth. The reason for this is that the idea behind free play is to find the theoretical turn floor if you had access to every single powerful tool that you could possibly gain access to, and so giving all of my units 100% growths in order to simulate rigging full growth level ups is a good way to accomplish that goal. Sacred Stones is one of my favorite Fire Emblem games, and I'm really excited to push it to its limits. And hey, if you're an efficiently minded person and you think you can spot some turn saves in my playthrough, feel free to try this format out, because it's super fun, and I would love to see other people's take on it, and yeah. You know, LTCing is a collaborative process, we stand on the shoulders of giants, etc, etc. So without any further ado, here's the playthrough. So right off the bat, I decided to load the early game up with the powerful post-game creature campaign exclusive units. I replaced Seth with Lyon, who I gave 2 energy rings and a warp staff for his 3 inventory slots, and I replaced Eirika with Glen, who gets a silver lance and a swift soul. The prologue is fairly trivial. It is a kill boss map, so I just kill the boss with the silver lance. If this were route, it would still be a 1 turn, but I would have to use 2 more uses of the silver lance. The boss isn't aggressive, but his 2 enemies are, so they would both suicide onto me on enemy phase. But that doesn't happen, so we can just move right on to Chapter 1. This is another very simple map, but I'm fairly certain it has a 2-turn turn floor. The reason for this is you only have access to 2 units at the start of the map, and I can't think of a single combination of 2 units that would be able to both kill the boss and have the Eirika replacement seize. Theoretically, you could have a flyer eat a bunch of Swift Souls on the Prologue map, but then you're losing turns overall because you're spending turns on Prologue in order to shave off 1 turn from the Chapter 1 clear. I also think that being stuck at a turn floor on this map is not the worst place in the world. Normally it's kind of annoying to have a turn floor anything higher than 1, especially in free play, because the entire point of this format is to try to break the game wide open. However, one quirk of free play is that if you clear maps faster than you're intended to, you actually end up losing units, giving you fewer slots to work with. At the start of player phase turn 2 on this map, 2 units show up, Franz and Gilliam in vanilla, and having those 2 slots to work with is going to make my Chapter 2 clear significantly easier. I think that sacrificing a turn, well, not really sacrificing a turn, but being forced to sacrifice a turn on Chapter 1 is kind of the best case scenario. Anyway, I'm sure you've noticed by now, but I decided to just warp Glen to the boss and have him enemy phase the boss, as well as everyone else around him. He hasn't gotten a level up yet, but he's getting close, and as a reminder, 100% growths are on, so that will net him a big fat juicy ball of stats. As for our two replacement units, Selena is replacing Gilliam, so she just has the one item, which is Barrier. The reason I chose Selena is that she is the only unit in the game who starts with B-Stabs. Theoretically, Mulder could get B-Stabs if he promoted, but he needs to get the experience and the staff rank, and I just don't think that's feasible in a free play setting. Selena feels like the only person who could possibly end up with a warp staff who doesn't start with one. So yeah, I have her go ahead and spam a barrier, and then she gets danced by Tethys, and I've moved Lyon up, second target for barrier, except for I actually elect to use the Hammern on the one-use used-up warp staff. This isn't because I so tightly care about warp that I need to Hammern a 4-use one, but because Hammern gives more staff experience than barrier does, and I really want to get Selena to warp on time. With that, I seize, and let's move on. Even though we don't have access to battle preparations yet, I can manage my unit's items during the map screen, which is super convenient because Tethys brought a nice gift for Cormag, our new recruit who's replacing Vanessa, and that's the Elysian Whip. He decides to fire off the earliest promotion item of all of Sacred Stones. This is a full 2 chapters before the earliest Ross promotion you could have. While the stat boosts are nice, the real gift here is the movement. He was exactly 1 point of movement short of 2 things that he needs to do on the next 2 maps, so the promotion solves that. Speaking of movement, movement is very important for Glen, so he eats a pair of boots in order to get +2 movement. Then Lyon, inspired by this, consumes stat boosters of his own, 2 energy rings. This, combined with a level up on the next map, is going to let him hit a threshold that he needs for a warp on a future map. Lastly, Selena takes a bolting and eats the Swift Souls, and we're ready to go. We are immediately going to make use of those boots and that bolting by having Selena go down to the farthest reaches of her movement and fire off a bolting on a brigand on the very bottom. He's on a peak, so it is a very low hit rate, sub 40 displayed hit, but sometimes that's the sort of things you gotta do. And would you believe me if I said this is actually the most reliable strategy to one-turn this map? Anyway, Lyon is going to go do Lyon things, by which I mean fire off a warp. He's going to send both of our wyverns to go fight the units that are way too far away for you to kill them on turn 1 of this map in vanilla. Glen is going to go deal with the brigands on the mountain. And then after a quick little dance from our lovely Tethys, Lyon is going to send Valder to the far right side of the map. By the way, if you've noticed any of these palettes seeming like just the generic, that's because the way in which I implemented the unit swap for free play has resulted in some of them just getting the generic blue palettes. Still, I think the blue palettes are kind of cute, so I decided to leave it be. We get our level up, and now Lyon has hit 27 magic, which is a threshold he needs for next map, so those rings are well spent. Speaking of well spent, Cormag is making full use of that promotion by moving farther than Vanessa could have because she's unpromoted, and one-rounding this cutthroat with the Axe Reaver. See, I used reliability from the Axe Reaver to make up for the fact that bolting is super unreliable. I guess now would be kind of a good time to talk about reliability. I initially had a strat where Glen was going to take on these brigands on a mountain with a javelin. He could set himself up in a position where he fights one on player phase and then the other 2 suicide on enemy phase, but it was really low hit rates. I decided against using the perfect luck patch or using a script in order to view the RNGs, and instead wanted to approach this playthrough from the perspective of I'm willing to rig some things, but the reliability threshold is basically if I'm willing to reset enough to have it happen. As a result, there's not going to be any 5% crit strategies, but there will definitely be some strategies where I rely on Selena hitting a subpar hit rate with bolting. This overall is a pretty reliable clear. The biggest thing is the bolting. Everyone else has very high hit rates and doubles, and most of them don't need to hit both hits. Anyway, Hayden is going to go ahead and punish this cutthroat for daring to attack his son, which completes the route of the map, so Chapter 2 is cleared in 1 turn. Before moving on to Chapter 3, I do need to trade around the inventories a tiny bit, and by a tiny bit, I mean exactly 1 item. Walter is going to go ahead and grab an Axe Reaver from Cormag, and then we are good to jump into the map. Chapter 3 is a pretty trivial seas map. It is a 1-turn easily now that we have 2 warpers. We start with some father-son bonding as Reeve warps Hayden to the other side of the wall. Reeve's warp range isn't quite the monstrous 27 magic Lyons, but it's still nice to have a second warper. There are only 2 units in the game who have A staves at base, so I'll take what I can get. Speaking of Lyon, he's going to go ahead and send Glen onto a barrel, and then Tethys is moving over to refresh him so that he can act again. Expect to see this maneuver very often going forward. Having Lyon warp is a little bit of a waste of his tremendous combat prowess, but honestly, I think that the huge warp range is absolutely worth it, especially in a seas map. We send Walter over, and there are only 2 enemies between us and the throne. There's that level up, by the way. The 28 magic isn't the biggest threshold in the world, but Necromancer cap is 30, so we are well on our way. I then Hemern the Warp Staff. This time Selena isn't just doing it for staff experience, but also because, hey, the warp is at 1, so what do you do when a Warp Staff hits 1? Use Hemern. Hemern really does just become the 15-use Warp Staff. Speaking of, Vanessa has Hemern. She also has another Warp Staff. I promise I didn't just choose Vanessa as an item delivery method. She is going to have a job to do on the next map. But if you want to see the next map, you are going to have to tune into the next video, because as you can probably tell from the rapidly approaching end timestamp, I'm killing the boss with Walter and then immediately seizing with Glen. That's why Glen had to eat the boots last map, by the way. He only reaches the throne if he eats a pair of Swift's shoes, whatever the fuck they're called. The boots. They're boots. I'm gonna call them boots. I appreciate Sacred Stones trying to come up with cool names, but they're the boots. We all know they're the boots.